Good morning and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. Yesterday we continued our reading and discussion of the book The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the so-called Holy See, Francis Rooney, concluding Chapter 12 in a brief discussion about Hugo Chavez. And now we're going to move on to Chapter 13, which is entitled Meetings of the Minds. Meetings of the Minds. Kind of words to describe the ecumenical movement as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, this chapter begins with a quote from Otto von Bismarck. Listen to what he says. The imponderabilia often have more influence in politics than gold or military force. The imponderabilia often have more influence in politics than gold or military force. Now, class, I have a question. Who are these imponderabilia mentioned by Otto von Bismarck? The imponderables, who are they? They are the priests of the Roman Catholic Church. The imponderables, the imponderabilia, are the priesthood of the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope and his priests. They are the imponderables because they have the power, so they claim, to drag Jesus Christ off of his throne at the right hand of the Father and put him in a piece of bread, a wafer, a host, in the Eucharistic Mass, and then to sacrifice him once again on the altar of the Roman Catholic Church for the remission of sins and for salvation, and that grace may be infused into the participant in the Mass. The Bible calls it the mystery of iniquity. Okay? There's no mystery at all to these imponderabilia. They are Satan's vicars, not Christ's vicars. They seek to replace Christ on the earth. They even dare to call themselves vicars of Christ or alter Christos, which means another Christ. Now, if you're still yet not convinced that the Roman Catholic priesthood and the papacy in particular constitutes the Antichrist of the Bible, I dare say very little would help to convince you. But we're convinced here at Inquisition Update, and many of our listeners are. And so now we're going, with that in mind, knowing now who these imponderabilia are, we'll continue with the reading of this book. Chapter 13 begins, "So," said the Pope, "we're going to see Mrs. Bush, right? It was my first Monday back in Rome after the holidays, the morning of the Pope's annual New Year's address to the diplomatic corps and spouses, and we were gathered in the Sala Regia, the ornate marble and fresco walled hall adjacent to the Sistine Chapel. The Pope had started his address to the diplomats with a general call for peace," right? The man of peace. He likes to counterfeit Christ, doesn't he? A call for peace, then devoted much of what followed to human rights, especially to freedom of religion. After all, if you are the most intolerant of all religions, you must try to convince the world, first of all, that you believe in freedom of religion, while you, through the civil powers of every government, make every human creature subject to the Roman pontiff. Okay, so these are words of deception. It says the Pope started his address to the diplomats with a great call for peace, when he is in fact a man of war, fomenting the wars of the world, and through these wars achieve Vatican power all over the globe, Vatican control. Then devoted much of what followed to human rights, that institution in the world that has most destroyed human rights the papacy is believed by the world to be, well, the promoter of human rights. And it says, especially to freedom of religion, the most intolerant of all religions, Roman Catholicism, despite her public ecumenical stand, is intolerant of all religions but its own. Listen, if a church like the Roman Catholic Church, which still today insists that it alone is the Church of Jesus Christ, and that the Apostle Peter was the rock and foundation of that church, and teaches through Roman Catholic canon law that there is salvation, there is no salvation outside of that Roman Catholic Church, then how in the world is anyone to believe that the Roman Catholic Church is acceptant of freedom of religion? And its most publicly stated opposition to all religions but the Roman Catholic is included in Pope Pius IX's encyclical and Syllabus of Error of 1864. So intolerance defines the Roman Catholic Church. The Inquisitions and the Crusades were based on the idea that the Roman Catholic Church is the only true religion. And the Pope is Christ's vicar on the earth and has divine right to rule this world. But publicly, the Roman Catholic Church has to present itself as to be a religion of peace and devoted to the propagation of human rights, the preservation of human rights, and also of religious freedom. Now it says, he was most forceful about terrorism. Guess who the terrorists are? Okay? You have to be able to foment wars if you're the man of war, and terror is the perfect threat and inciter of war. Now he's going to speak against terrorism. Quote, no situation can justify such criminal activity, said the Pope, which covers the perpetrators with infamy, and it is all the more deplorable when it hides behind religion. It's all the more deplorable when it hides behind religion. Now, obviously, the Pope believes that the hearers of his words are just going to assume that the papacy has no influence at all on terrorist activities at all in the world. And that his listeners would also believe that the terrorists are the Muslims. Okay? They're the ones who are splattered all over the mainstream and alternative medias as being the great terror of the world. Okay? But it is the papacy, through her Jesuits, that raise up these terror organizations and use those terror organizations to move the militaries of the world to achieve Vatican goals. Vatican political and religious goals. In her defense that she is the only true religion in the world and should have an unchallenged right to rule the world. And he says this terrorism is all the more deplorable when it hides behind religion. This has got to be the epitome of hypocrisy. And I want my listeners to be able to see through it. It covers the perpetrators with infamy and is all the more deplorable when it hides behind religion. Imagine the Pope of Rome saying words like that, and the world not recognizing to whom it really applies. Master deceivers, absolute masters of deception. He says, after the Pope's address, we took our turns in a receiving line. This was a formal and highly ceremonial occasion, but any encounter with the Pope is meaningful, and in this case, the Pope had news to convey, good news. He would grant the First Lady of the United States, Barbara Bush, an audience, or George W. Bush, is it Barbara? No. I'll get to it in a minute. Anyway, he granted First Lady Bush an audience when she came to Rome the following month. Quote, "If you say so, Your Holiness," I replied to the Pope, "we're sure looking forward to it," unquote. He said I'd only learned about the First Lady's visit a few days prior to the Pope's address. While visiting Washington for the annual Chiefs of Mission conference at the State Department, I'd been contacted at my hotel by the First Lady's Chief of Staff, Anita McBride. She told me that Mrs. Bush very much wanted to see the Pope while in Europe for the Winter Olympics in Torino in February, and that it was an important priority of the White House. So please try to make this happen. My first call to the Vatican about the First Lady's visit was not promising. I was informed that Benedict had only given formal audiences to heads of state, newly accredited ambassadors, and recognized groups that had business with the Holy See. No First Ladies or other head of state spouses. Landing back in Rome on the morning of Saturday, January 7th, I went to the residence, changed clothes, and headed directly to the Vatican to meet Angelo Sedano, the Cardinal Secretary of State. Remember, he's the second in charge at the Vatican, to see what arrangements could be made. Cardinal Sedano was cordial but non-committal. The Vatican was reluctant to break precedent, he explained, even for Mrs. Bush. He suggested that one possible solution might be an unofficial, quote-unquote, personal visit. Remember how the personal visits went before having a formal ambassador to the Holy See was acceptable? The president sent personal representatives and conducted official political policy. Okay? So it's just all in a matter of how you dress it. All right? It's going to be possible for Mrs. Bush to meet the Pope on a quote-unquote personal basis. Okay? He says this sounded fine, but it wasn't until I was shaking the Pope's hand on Monday that I had positive confirmation. A meeting between First Lady of the United States and a Pope is of real consequence, however it might be organized. It is the kind of personal interaction that creates goodwill, forges long-term relationships, and establishes the platform for successful diplomacy. In retrospect, Mrs. Bush's visit laid out the themes for a dramatic year ahead, which would feature some of the most important incidents of the Benedict XVI's papacy. A few days before Mrs. Bush landed in Rome that February, tensions between quote-unquote Christians and Muslims flared in Europe. The precipitating event was the republication in several European newspapers of cartoons that had originally appeared in a Danish newspaper. These were the same cartoons of Muhammad that had sparked violent protest when they were first published in September of 2005. Their republication was meant to be an assertion of the right of free press against Islamic fundamentalism. To many Muslims, though, it looked like a blasphemous provocation. The result was that Mrs. Bush arrived in Europe at a time of great unrest around the world. On February 4th, Muslim protesters surrounded the set fire to the Danish embassy in Damascus. The following day, protesters burned the Danish embassy in Beirut as a 61-year-old Italian missionary, Father Andrea Santoro, was killed in a church in Turkey. Now, on February 9th, at the very moment I was accompanying Mrs. Bush through the Arch of Bells into Vatican City, hundreds of thousands of Shia Muslims were demonstrating on the streets of Lebanon. Despite the fact that Mrs. Bush's visit had been officially designated as quote-unquote personal, The First Lady was accorded all the process and ceremony of an official papal audience, from the red carpet greeting in the Cortile San Damaso to the formal escort up the long stairs through the Apostolic Palace to the Pope's inner sanctum. I accompanied Mrs. Bush and her daughter Barbara into the papal library. The press snapped a few pictures as we took our seats with the Pope, then the doors shut. Mrs. Bush and the Pope spoke warmly of shared interests in a number of humanitarian programs, including AIDS treatment and PrEPFAR, and the battle to end poverty and hunger. I mentioned that Barbara had recently returned from Africa, where she worked in an AIDS clinic. This interested the Pope greatly. We then discussed the subject of radicalizing madrasas in the sub-Saharan Africa, an area that traditionally practiced a moderate form of Islam. These Saudi-backed religious schools, often located in impoverished communities in the Near East and Africa, tend to promote a version of Islam that is intolerant and extreme. The Pope contrasted the madrasas fundamentalist approach to God with American ideals of faith, in which church and state were ideally separated but mutually respected, and expressed his concern about what the madrasas might mean for the future. So they painted the Muslims, the great terror of the world, the most intolerant of all religions, the fundamentalist, radical Muslim terrorists. And of course, you know, you have to have a distraction if you are the man of sin and the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist of the Bible. You have to have a diversion. And the Muslims are that diversion. The Pope shifts the focus away from Roman Catholic history and puts it on the Muslims, a very excitable people. The Bible even describes them. And so the papacy, knowing the excitability and tendency toward violence of the Muslims, to simply infiltrate them, get control of them, raise up controversy and discord among them, and then arm them and finance them so that they become the world's terrorists. All the lights and all the cameras shift away from the true Antichrist of the Bible onto these Muslim fundamentalists. And of course, the word fundamentalism now is demonized, which perfectly describes Bible-believing Christians, fundamentalists. The Bible is fundamental to our faith. So guess where the persecution and the demonization is going to go after the radical fundamentalist Islamists are done away with? That's right, Bible-believing Christians. Now, the Pope's concern was prescient. With a continued evolution and broadening of violent expressions of Islam, incidents have occurred as recently as July 2012 in Mali, Niger, and Somalia. In Nigeria, meanwhile, the radical Islamic group Boko Haram continued to bomb churches and government buildings through the fall of 2012. The Horn of Africa is now considered by terrorism experts to be, as the Wall Street Journal described the area in January of 2012, quote, the next battleground in the fight against Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, unquote. And in case you didn't know it, Al-Qaeda was literally created by the United States CIA department. Now he says, the Catholics in action at the CIA. Al-Qaeda is their baby. I call it Al-CIA-da. That's what it is. And you can consider ISIS to be the same. It's the United States government that has adopted Jesuit strategy, fomenting the wars of the world through terror and financing it. It's your tax dollars. and money that's run by the CIA's drug operations around the world that finance these terror organizations, and they are used as justification for more war. Wars that achieve global governance for the Pope. All right? Now he says, altogether, the meeting between the Pope and Mrs. Bush was a productive and substantive exchange. Productive and substantive. Did anyone elect Mrs. Bush? Can she speak for the United States? I think not. And especially when she's speaking to the man of sin. He says, in a half an hour or so, we were back in the Cortile San Damaso's, stepping into the limousine to take Mrs. Bush and to her next appointment. Quote, the American people are a religious people, of course, all different religions, unquote, the First Lady said in an interview with Vatican Radio later that day. Quote, but we share a lot of the same values with the Catholic Church, unquote. So where's all the emphasis? Any of those other religions mentioned? No, just the Catholic Church. See, this is ecumenism at work. Acknowledge all the other religions in this country, but place them in a context of the Catholic Church, which is preferred by the government. Okay? Now, if that doesn't breach the threshold of the establishment of a religion, I don't know what it is. But I do not have anything in common with the Catholic Church. And neither do any Protestants, any truly Protestant people in this country. Now, we might be an extreme minority, but I don't want anybody from our government dealing with the man of sin and bringing into this country Roman Catholic teaching, and especially not codifying Roman Catholic canon law into the civil laws of this land. I protest against being made Catholic through the civil power. And I think every God-fearing, Bible-believing Christian should stand up and say, I serve but one king. His name is Christ Jesus, and I denounce the papacy as Antichrist. And I denounce his Roman Catholic canon law as a replacement of God's holy, perpetual, and immutable law. That's the stand of Protestantism. But you don't hear hardly a word of it in this country. The greatest of all evils to be feared is no longer even protested in this country. He says, as I mentioned earlier in these pages, I was fortunate to serve as ambassador at a time when the values of the United States government and the Holy See were particularly congruent. President Bush's views on the sanctity of life and the importance of faith in civic society, for example, found a very receptive audience inside the Vatican. The war in Iraq struck some chords of disharmony, but on the whole, the Holy See sympathized with and shared our apprehensions and our determinations regarding terrorism. 5 years out from 9/11, we were all still consumed by threats rising from the Middle East, and not a day passed without these weighing heavily in all formal and informal conversations with the Holy See and other diplomatic representatives. Yes, it was a matter of daily concern at the Vatican because it's their operation. And lest the world find out the truth about who's behind the terrorism in the world, they must advance their cause as rapidly as possible. The New World Order is going to come in with a bang. It's already here. We'll be back right after this.
years ahead of the dominant media. FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to support Inquisition Update, and we do need your support, it costs money to produce and air Inquisition Update, and Nicholas pays the bills. So send your contributions to First Amendment Radio. Now, back to the book. The great concern of the Holy See is terrorism, because it's their operation. And the world must not find out about it. And the United States government helps to cover up that fact. Okay? The author says, but if terrorism deeply concerns the Holy See, it was just one among many subjects that demanded the Pope's attention. The church is everywhere, and popes, like presidents, must handle a wide range of issues simultaneously. One area that demanded significant attention during Benedict's early papacy and my years as ambassador was Latin America, where the Catholic Church holds a strong position and where the United States hoped to pursue common interests. Obviously, a Roman Catholic government of America would want to, work on joint ventures with Roman Catholic South and Central America, wouldn't it not? Especially if you're making the whole world Catholic, bringing everyone into subjection to the Holy See. It says the region was a special focus for us, and we had numerous interactions with the Vatican about it during my tenure. The Catholic Church has been through several permutations in Latin America since European colonization in the 15th century brought waves of Catholic missionaries. Okay, 15th century marked when Rome tainted the soil and the hearts and the minds of South and Central America. The 15th century. That's when the Pope was losing all of his power, being stripped of his land, being stripped of his gold, having been claimed to be the Antichrist by a growing number of Christians in Europe. Nation after nation, kingdom after kingdom rejecting the papacy. The papacy found fertile soil in the Western Hemisphere. And when the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, began to crumble in Europe and the rest of the world, Rome found a refuge and a new basis for a global war of conquest in the Western Hemisphere. South Central America, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. All right. This is what I refer to as the wilderness beast, that which stood up in the wilderness. Okay. Revelation chapter 13. He says, by the 19th century, most of South America and north through Mexico were overwhelmingly Catholic. See what happened in just a few hundred years? 400 years, from the 15th to the 19th century, all of South and Central America, plus Mexico, and you can include Canada in this, became Roman Catholic, overwhelmingly Catholic. Many of the countries signed concordats with the Holy See. Now, just a quick refresher, a concordat is that diplomatic exchange of guarantees between a nation and the papacy, whereby the Roman Catholic Church or the papacy, the Holy See, whatever you want to call it, becomes a partner in the civil government. And the civil government must guarantee religious liberty for Catholics, and it must financially support the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? That's why you see all these grand cathedrals all over Roman Catholic countries, because they are taxpayer paid. The priests are paid by the government. The Roman Catholic Church becomes the darling of those nations. Now, America is supposedly not a concordat nation, but I suggest that even if, and I say if, even if there is not a written concordat, there is indeed a visible, intangible concordat, a meeting of the minds between the United States government and the quote-unquote Holy See. And it is taxpayers' money that makes sure the Roman Catholic Church is financially equipped to deal with the issues that it seems important in the United States of America. Now, how they launder that tax money and make sure it gets in the hands of the Roman Catholic Church, only the mind can muddle through that. But we know from the reading of the book The Vatican Billions, Averell Manhattan describes how vast tracts of land have been sold to the Roman Catholic Church for mere dollars. And it is these lands which are placed Roman Catholic institutions, nunneries, hospitals, schools, colleges, universities, and cathedrals themselves. So that's how your tax dollars and the terra firma here in the United States of America is bequeathed to the Roman Catholic Church. Now, if the United States does not officially have a written concordat with the Vatican, it certainly acts like it does. All right? But we're led to believe that only these South and Central America and Mexico are concordat nations. I don't believe that's true. It says by the 19th century, most of South America and north through Mexico were overwhelmingly Catholic. Look at what they accomplished in just 400 years. It became overwhelmingly Catholic in just 400 years. Now put the United States of America, considering the colonial period up to the present, might it be possible that America is just as much overwhelmingly Catholic? Was there any less effort to Romanize America than there was Mexico, Central and South America? Does Mexico, Central and South America fight the papal proxy wars around the world? Are they the Pope's global police, or is the United States of America? You see, we're far, far, far more valuable to the papacy, a so-called non-concordat nation, than all the concordat nations south of here. Okay? If we're not a concordat nation, we've literally redefined what a concordat is. The United States of America, believed around the world to be a Protestant nation. Okay? So who's going to take the blame for all the Catholic atrocities being committed around the world by our Catholic government? Protestants. You see how Rome shifts the blame? This is outrageous what happens before the eyes and ears of the American people, and they fail to comprehend it because they fail to comprehend their Bibles. It says by the 19th century, most of South America and north through Mexico were overwhelmingly Catholic. Many of the countries signed concordats with the Holy See, giving the Church preferred legal status and endowing some of its teachings with the weight of law. Let me put it in Inquisition update terms. They simply took Roman Catholic canon law and made it the civil law. Listen, let me read it again and make sure you understand what he's telling you and that I'm not embellishing what he says. Listen again. He says many of the countries signed concordats with the Holy See, giving the Church, that is the Roman Catholic Church, preferred legal status and endowing some of its teachings, that's Roman Catholic canon law, with the weight of law. It endowed Roman Catholic teaching with the weight of law. It's simply saying that the civil law codifies Roman Catholic canon law. Now, does anyone within the sound of my voice comprehend why I say that the civil laws of the United States are simply rewritten Roman Catholic canon law, and that you are being made Catholic without your knowledge? That you are being made subject to the Roman pontiff without your knowledge. You may profess Jesus Christ with your mouth, but you obey the Pope. If you obey the civil laws of this land, you are subject to the Roman pontiff. Because the Roman pontiff ultimately is the author of the civil laws of this land. The weight of civil law is based in Roman Catholic canon law. And when this finally sinks in, you can't come to many other conclusions but that this is an Antichrist country. There are Christians living in it, Bible-believing Christians, but the dividing line between the Bible-believing Christians and the Church of Antichrist in this country is being blurred every day. And we have to decide who we're going to serve. This is a subject that demands that a decision be made. And making no decision is a decision. And the war that Inquisition Update is fighting is not for the Constitution of the United States. The war that Inquisition Update is fighting against the Antichrist is the efficacy of the Bible. The Bible trumps all human law, including the Constitution of the United States, and especially Roman Catholic canon law, which is written to just defy the Bible. But all of our focus is being on defending the Constitution of the United States. Well, that's a good start. It has some Protestant tenets. But in the kingdom of heaven, there's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of religion. Is there? Can you be a member of the kingdom of Christ and speak blasphemies against the Most High? Can you be in the kingdom of Christ and think Allah to be a prophet of God? You see, we're made to believe that the solution to our spiritual dilemma in this country is a defense of the Constitution of the United States. That doesn't even begin to cover it. I hope my listeners understand the point that I'm making. I'm not damning the Constitution. I'm just telling you it falls far short of the kingdom of heaven. So put things in proper perspective when we're talking about the Constitution of the United States. And when Rome, tentatively at least, seems to defend the rights and liberties encoded in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, that is not the kingdom of heaven. The Constitution is the basis for, supposedly, the basis of all civil law in this country, but it's not regarded as such by the papacy. The papacy demands that all the laws be made in conformity with Roman Catholic canon law. So if it seems like I'm fighting against the Constitution by making these statements, you must know that the Vatican is equally fighting against the Constitution in defense of Roman Catholic canon law. My attack upon the Constitution is based on making the Bible the code of spiritual and temporal power. Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So don't let anybody misquote me about my teaching on the Constitution. There are many people out there that just love to misquote Inquisition Update, but the truth will find them out. Now, the early decades of the 20th century often found the church in alignment with right-wing regimes. But in the mid-1960s, after Vatican Council II, this changed in some areas as the movement of liberation theology. Now, this is a subject that I'm not expert on, but I take it to mean that it is it upholds many of the tenets of Roman Catholicism, but it gets its authority elsewhere than the Roman Catholic Church or the papacy. So the papacy is somewhat diminished in liberation theology. The Pope's never going to tolerate that. So that's why the Pope speaks as though he's against liberation theology, when the fact of the matter is the Roman Catholic Church will accept the liberation theology as long as the Pope is the head of it. Okay, it's all about the position the Pope plays in liberation theology that really sticks under the craw of the papacy. But I won't get into any more details about it. It'll mess up the line of thinking here. He says the early decades of the 20th century often found the Roman Catholic Church in alignment with right-wing regimes, but in the mid-1960s, after Vatican Council II, This changed in some areas as the movement of liberation theology spread through local clergy. Now, another brief description of liberation theology: it is more socialist than right wing. It's more left than right. This supports the constant teaching here at Inquisition Update that the Roman Catholic Church is split. There's an extreme right wing of the Roman Catholic Church and an extreme left wing of the Roman Catholic Church. One is stridently traditionalist. In other words, they hold to the Council of Trent and the Counter-Reformation and the Latin Mass, and the liberal wing of the Roman Catholic Church are about family planning, contraception, Mass in the vernacular tongue, Mass given in the hand instead of placed on the tongue by the priest. In other words, they're considered by the Vatican to be the liberals. Now, that divide in the Roman Catholic Church is the very mechanism through which Rome, through conflict between the left and the right, advances its overall objective. The same is true of liberal and conservative politics. Liberal and conservative politics achieve the same aims as the liberal and the conservative wings of the Roman Catholic Church. So if you are politically conservative, you're serving a Vatican agenda. And if you're politically liberal, you are also serving a Vatican agenda. This is why I never engage in partisan political discussions, because they are just two sides of one diabolical coin. This is the mechanism I described in an earlier broadcast as the pendulum that swings in the grandfather clock. Look, if the pendulum in a grandfather clock does not swing, the second hand and the minute hand and the hour hand of the grandfather clock never advances, does it? There's no movement to advance the hands on the clock. But if you take the pendulum and swing it first right and then left, or vice versa, left and then right, as long as that pendulum keeps swinging, you give the dynamic that moves the hands of the grandfather clock. Without the left and without the right, the papacy cannot advance its global agenda. Just as the Roman Catholic Church is both right-wing and left-wing, and there's controversy within the church, that feeds it the necessary energy to advance an overall agenda. Globalism, papal control. Likewise, in partisan politics, you have the same dynamic taking place. Conservatives on the right, liberals on the left, the pendulum swings, the energy is expended, and the hands of the papal clock advance. The New World Order is advanced. Every time there's a shift in power in Washington, D.C., the focus is placed on the right-wing papal agenda. When it swings the other way, the left wing of the papal agenda is advanced. I hope my listeners can comprehend this. What you see as a legitimate war between two seemingly different partisan politics is literally one agenda, a papal agenda. This is how the New World Order is restored, through politics and conflict and change. All right. The early decades of the 20th century often found the Roman Catholic Church in alignment with right-wing regimes. There's the swing to the right. But in the 1960s, after Vatican Council II, this changed in some areas as the movement of liberation theology spread through the local clergy. There's the swing of the pendulum to the left. And it says followers of liberation theology wanted to help the poor, alleviate human suffering, push for justice, and stand up to despots. But in doing so, they drew the church into domestic politics. You see the deception here? Rome controls domestic politics. She's the one that swings the pendulum left and right. Okay? But if you listen to the language of this, Rome doesn't want to be involved in domestic politics. But it does want every nation to sign a concordat so it can control the government of every nation, right? Do you see the contradiction here? I hope my listeners can see the contradiction of this. He says, this is what happened in Nicaragua, where Pope John Paul II reproved, Father Ernesto Cardenal for serving as a minister in the cabinet of the Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega. The pastoral mission of the church can become diffused and depreciated when the church becomes too closely aligned with any secular government. What does that really mean? The Vatican is intimately involved with every secular government, but it must maintain its sovereign status and never be so closely aligned with any political regime that it is made subject to that regime. The Pope always maintains his sovereign status, his King of Kings and Lord of Lords status. All right? So whenever the Roman Catholic Church acts like it's not answerable to anybody else, it's because the Pope believes himself to be the vicar of Christ and not subject to any authority on the earth, not even any authority in heaven. Completely sovereign. Okay, and it demands, because of its sovereignty, it demands to have authority over all civil powers of every nation. All right, it says the fact that some regimes supported by these priests were themselves guilty of human rights abuses complicated matters greatly. In 2006, the United States and the Holy See were in broad agreement that several regimes in power in Latin America were inhospitable to freedom and human rights. Venezuela was one of the most obvious instances of this, but Bolivia, Ecuador, and Nicaragua, along with a few Caribbean countries, had joined Venezuela in a new organization called the Bolivian Alliance for the Peoples of Our Americans, or ALBA, A-L-B-A. One leading United States think tank describes ALBA as the, quote, fulcrum for anti-Americanism in the Americas, unquote. Wonder what anti-Americanism means to ALBA. We'll have to get to that tomorrow because I'm fresh out of time and my voice is beginning to crack already. It's going to be a long day. Pray for me. I need your prayers, dealing with some physical issues right now, and hope God leaves me at my station. I've got lots to do for the advancement of His kingdom and the destruction of the kingdom of Antichrist. We'll be back tomorrow. Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.